The wild idea of unleashing millions of bees into a barren desert seemed, well, a little bit crazy. Let's be honest, most people chuckled, shook their heads, and dismissed it as another quirky Nevada headline. But just 1 month later, those same people were starting to hum a different tune. And this is the story of why. Why would anyone in their right mind dump millions of buzzing insects into a seemingly lifeless expanse of sand and scrub? It sounds like something straight out of a cartoon, right? A bizarre prank, maybe? But believe it or not, this wasn't some random act of ecological vandalism. It was born out of a real and frankly terrifying crisis: the global decline of bee populations. See, bees, as much as we might take them for granted, are facing some serious challenges. Habitat loss, pesticide use, climate change, disease, you name it, they're battling it. And Nevada's desert ecosystems were feeling the sting, pun intended, just as much as anywhere else. Without enough pollinators flitting around, the native plants simply couldn't reproduce effectively. And when the plants suffer, the entire food web starts to unravel. Think of it like a game of Jenga. Pull out too many crucial pieces, and the whole tower comes tumbling down. Nevada's scientists and environmentalists saw an opportunity, a chance to potentially reverse this decline and breathe life back into their struggling desert. The plan? To release a massive influx of bees, essentially jump-starting the pollination process and giving nature a much-needed boost. Now, the idea on paper sounded a little ambitious. Millions of tiny insects in one of the harshest environments on Earth? It's easy to understand why the critics were quick to pounce, branding the initiative as foolhardy, pointless, and even ecologically irresponsible. The prevailing sentiment was, it's the desert. Nothing can thrive there. But sometimes, just sometimes, taking a big risk can yield even bigger rewards. To understand why Nevada was willing to roll the dice, we need to delve deeper into the vital role that bees play and why this seemingly crazy plan was, in fact, a carefully considered attempt to fix something much bigger than just the desert itself. When most of us think of bees, the first image that probably pops into our heads is honey. That sweet, golden nectar we love to drizzle on our toast or stir into our tea. But bees are so much more than just honey-making machines. They're arguably one of the most critical players in the entire natural world, especially when it comes to pollination. Pollination is basically the plant world's version of a secret handshake. It's the process by which plants reproduce, and without bees buzzing from flower to flower, carrying pollen on their fuzzy little bodies, many of our favorite plants simply wouldn't be able to produce seeds or fruits. And if plants can't reproduce, ecosystems would struggle to survive and ultimately collapse. Think of pollination as nature's matchmaking service. Bees, in their quest to collect nectar and pollen for their own sustenance, inadvertently carry pollen grains from one flower to another. This allows plants to fertilize their eggs and create the next generation. Without this vital process, a huge chunk of the fruits, vegetables, nuts, and flowers that we all enjoy wouldn't exist. In fact, believe it or not, nearly 75% of the world's flowering plants depend on pollinators like bees to reproduce. That's a staggering number, and it highlights just how crucial these little creatures are. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Bees aren't just suited for lush gardens or temperate climates. Certain species are incredibly resilient and have evolved to thrive in some of the most challenging environments on Earth, including, you guessed it, deserts. These desert-dwelling bees have developed unique behaviors and physical traits that allow them to cope with extreme heat, scarce water, and limited food sources. They're masters of adaptation. They can fly during the cooler parts of the day, forage efficiently, and find hidden blooms and water droplets that most of us wouldn't even notice. Their tenacity and resourcefulness are truly remarkable. And this adaptability is precisely why Nevada's plan to release millions of bees into its desert might actually have a chance of working. It's not about blindly throwing helpless insects into a wasteland. It's about strategically introducing nature's own desert survivalists into a struggling ecosystem that desperately needs a jumpstart. The bee's role isn't simply about producing honey, it's about sparking a chain reaction of life and growth. But the benefits extend far beyond just wild plants. Bees are absolutely crucial for agriculture too. Many of the crops that we rely on for sustenance, Apples, almonds, berries, and even onions require bees to pollinate their flowers. Without these tiny workers, crop yields plummet, prices skyrocket, and food security becomes dangerously shaky. Pollinators contribute billions of dollars to the global economy each year, making their survival essential for both nature and humanity. So, when Nevada made the decision to introduce millions of bees into the desert, it wasn't a reckless stunt. It was a calculated experiment rooted in a deep understanding of the power and resilience of these often overlooked creatures. The question that everyone was asking was, could these bees actually turn an inhospitable desert into a blossoming landscape? And what would it mean for the state's environment and the people who call it home? 1 month later, the narrative surrounding Nevada's bee drop took a dramatic turn. Remember the initial skepticism? The outright mockery? Well, the desert had a surprise in store, and it wasn't just a mirage. The first, and perhaps most striking change, was the unexpected desert bloom. Now, Nevada isn't exactly known for its lush floral displays, but in the weeks following the bee release, something remarkable began to happen. Native wildflowers, which had been struggling for survival in the harsh environment, started to flourish. Patches of vibrant color, unheard of in recent years, began to dot the landscape. Think of it: yellows, purples, oranges, piercing through the otherwise monochrome canvas of sand and rock. It wasn't just a few isolated pockets of blooms either. The effect was widespread, transforming entire sections of the desert into a veritable tapestry of life. And these weren't just any wildflowers. They were the resilient species native to Nevada, the ones that had adapted over millennia to survive in this challenging climate. They were back, and they were thriving. Of course, the thriving bee colonies played a pivotal role in this transformation. The millions of bees, initially dismissed as doomed to fail, proved their resilience. They adapted to the extreme temperatures, adjusting their foraging patterns to avoid the scorching midday sun. They diligently pollinated the native plants, ensuring the survival and propagation of the species. And here's the really mind-blowing part. The bees didn't just pollinate the flowers that were already there. They also helped to awaken dormant seeds that had been lying in wait for years, sometimes even decades. These sleeping beauties of the desert, triggered by the increased pollination and the resulting changes in soil composition, sprung to life, adding further to the unexpected bloom. But the positive impact didn't stop there. The thriving bee colonies and the flourishing plant life created a ripple effect throughout the entire ecosystem. More flowers meant more food for insects, which in turn provided sustenance for birds and small mammals. The entire food chain, which had been teetering on the brink of collapse, was revitalized. Lizards basked in the sun amidst the newly sprouted vegetation. Birds chirped merrily as they flitted from flower to flower, feasting on the abundance of insects. Small mammals scurried through the undergrowth, finding shelter and sustenance in the revitalized landscape. The desert, once seemingly devoid of life, was now buzzing, chirping, and teeming with activity. And the public perception? Well, it underwent a complete 180-degree turn. The initial mockery and skepticism gave way to awe and admiration. The crazy stunt was now hailed as an environmental triumph. People who had once dismissed the bee drop as a fool's errand were now singing its praises. Local news outlets, which had initially ridiculed the project, ran glowing reports on the desert's remarkable transformation. Social media, once filled with jokes and memes, now showcased stunning photographs of the vibrant wildflowers and the buzzing bee colonies. Even national and international media outlets picked up the story, highlighting Nevada's innovative approach to ecosystem restoration. Scientists, too, were astounded by the results. They meticulously documented the changes in plant life, bee populations, and soil composition. Their data confirmed what was already visually apparent. The bee drop had been an unqualified success. The desert was healing, and the bees were playing a crucial role in its recovery. But perhaps the most heartwarming aspect of this shifting public perception was the renewed sense of hope and optimism it instilled in the local communities. People who had lived in the area for decades, witnessing the gradual decline of the desert ecosystem, now had reason to believe that things could get better. They saw firsthand the power of nature to heal itself, given the right support. given the right support. Local schools organized field trips to the blooming desert, teaching children about the importance of pollinators and the delicate balance of ecosystems. Community groups organized cleanup efforts to remove litter and debris from the area, further contributing to its revitalization. A sense of collective ownership and responsibility for the desert's health emerged, fostering a spirit of environmental stewardship that had been lacking for years. The thriving bee colonies, the unexpected desert bloom, and the shifting public perception all combined to create a powerful narrative of hope and resilience. Nevada's bee drop, once mocked as a crazy stunt, became a shining example of how innovative solutions and a little bit of faith in nature can transform even the most challenging environments. The desert was buzzing, not just with bees, but with a renewed sense of possibility. The ripple effect. So what happens when millions of bees start buzzing around a desert that was once almost lifeless? It turns out quite a lot. The arrival of these tiny pollinators didn't just help a handful of flowers bloom, it sparked a chain reaction that began reshaping the entire ecosystem. First, the plants. With more bees pollinating native flowers and shrubs, seed production increased. Those seeds mean more plants grow, which leads to better ground cover. This helps reduce soil erosion, a huge issue in deserts where wind and water can strip away the fragile topsoil. More plants also mean more shade and moisture retention, which cools the soil and creates a better environment for other species to take hold. And it's not just plants that benefit. With an increase in vegetation, animals have more food and shelter. Birds that feed on insects and seeds started showing up more frequently, and small mammals like rodents found safer places to live and forage. Even reptiles, like lizards and snakes, indirectly benefited as their food sources increased. The bees essentially kicked off a positive feedback loop. More plants meant more nectar and pollen, which supported larger and healthier bee colonies. Larger bee populations, in turn, pollinated even more plants, accelerating the desert's recovery. It was like nature's own domino effect, one small change leading to bigger and better outcomes. Interestingly, the impact stretched beyond the immediate area of the bee release. Wind and animals carried seeds further into the desert, gradually greening spots that hadn't seen life in years. This kind of spread is crucial for long-term ecosystem recovery, helping prevent desertification from advancing. Scientists also noticed improvements in soil health. Plant roots helped stabilize the soil while decaying plants added nutrients back to the ground. This improved soil quality supports even more diverse plant life, which is essential for a resilient desert ecosystem. Of course, this kind of ecological turnaround isn't magic. It takes time and patience. But the initial signs were clear. Nevada's bold bee experiment was starting to breathe life into a landscape many had written off. The desert was becoming more than just a dry wasteland, it was becoming a thriving habitat again. This ripple effect proved that with the right interventions, even the toughest ecosystems can heal. And it raised exciting questions. Could similar strategies help other deserts or degraded lands around the world? Nevada's desert buzz was turning into a model for environmental restoration, showing how a small insect can make a big difference. Agriculture and farmers in Nevada. When you think of Nevada, sprawling farms might not be the first image that comes to mind. But agriculture is a quietly important part of the state's economy and culture. From alfalfa fields to orchards growing apples, pears, and cherries, Nevada farmers rely heavily on pollinators to keep their crops healthy and productive. And that's where these millions of newly introduced bees come into the picture. Pollination isn't just a nice-to-have for farmers, it's essential. Many crops depend on bees to transfer pollen between flowers, which allows fruits and vegetables to form properly. Without bees, yields shrink and the quality of produce drops. For farmers in Nevada's tough climate, where growing conditions are already challenging, losing pollinators would be a huge blow. In recent years, farmers across the country, including those in Nevada, have faced a growing pollination crisis. Bee populations have been declining due to factors like pesticide use, habitat loss, diseases, and climate change. This has forced some farmers to rent commercial bee colonies for pollination services at high costs, cutting into their profits and raising concerns about the sustainability of food production. by boosting the desert's native bee population. Nevada's experiment didn't just help wild plants, it gave farmers a much-needed hand. The influx of bees increased pollination rates in agricultural areas near the desert, leading to better crop yields and healthier plants. In some cases, farmers reported seeing more vibrant blossoms and bigger harvests just weeks after the bees arrived. This boost also had economic ripple effects. Stronger harvests mean more income for farmers and local communities, supporting jobs and small businesses linked to agriculture. Plus, healthier crops help keep food prices stable and contribute to food security, especially in a region where growing conditions can be unpredictable. Beyond economics, the bee experiment sparked renewed interest in sustainable farming practices. Many farmers began exploring ways to protect and encourage native pollinators, like planting bee-friendly flowers along field edges or reducing pesticide use, recognizing that healthy bee populations benefit everyone. Nevada's bee release showed that pollinators are the unsung heroes of agriculture. Their buzzing isn't just background noise, it's the sound of a system working, crops thriving, and farmers able to keep doing what they love. In a place where water is scarce and the environment is tough, having millions of new bee allies made all the difference. Economic impact beyond agriculture. When most people hear about millions of bees buzzing in Nevada's desert, their first thought usually jumps to farms and crops. And sure, the impact on agriculture is huge. But the story doesn't stop at the farm gate. The desert's newfound buzz brought surprising economic benefits that ripple through local communities in ways few expected. For starters, the desert itself started to feel less like a barren wasteland and more like a place worth visiting. Suddenly, those vibrant wildflower blooms became a draw for eco-tourists, hikers, photographers, and nature lovers eager to witness a rare transformation. This influx of visitors helped local businesses, from small cafes to outdoor gear shops, see more customers during seasons that were typically slow. Local tour operators began offering guided nature walks focused on the bees and the blooming desert plants. These tours weren't just about pretty flowers. They were educational experiences explaining how pollinators revive ecosystems and why Nevada's desert was now a living laboratory of restoration. Schools got involved too, with field trips and citizen science projects that brought kids and families closer to nature and created new demand for educational materials and local guides. The growing interest also sparked job creation beyond traditional farming. Positions popped up for bee specialists, environmental educators, and conservation workers tasked with monitoring and supporting the desert's recovery. These roles helped diversify the local economy and provided new career paths in regions that often struggled with employment opportunities. Another surprising outcome? The rise in small-scale sustainable businesses tied to the desert's revival. Artisans began creating bee-related crafts, local honey producers marketed desert blossom varieties, and restaurants highlighted dishes inspired by native plants flourishing thanks to the bees. These ventures helped strengthen community identity and pride, turning the bees' presence into a cultural as well as economic asset. Of course, this economic buzz wasn't automatic or guaranteed. It required coordinated efforts between scientists, local leaders, and businesses to harness the desert's transformation responsibly. Too much tourist traffic, for example, could disrupt fragile habitats, so careful management was key. What this all shows is that environmental restoration can have wide-reaching benefits beyond the obvious. Bringing bees to Nevada's desert wasn't just about plants and pollination. It sparked a chain reaction that lifted communities, created new opportunities, and inspired hope that even harsh environments can support thriving economies. In a way, the bees became tiny ambassadors for Nevada's desert, carrying more than just pollen. They carried the promise of renewal and prosperity for people and nature alike, from mockery to admiration. When Nevada first announced their plan to dump millions of bees into a desert, the reaction was, let's just say, skeptical. Headlines ranged from amused disbelief to outright mockery. What could possibly go right with that? People asked. Bees in the desert? They'll be dead in days. Social media was flooded with jokes, memes, and plenty of eye-rolling. Even among scientists, opinions were mixed. Some experts thought it was a bold and innovative approach to ecological restoration, while others warned it was risky and could have unintended consequences. Critics feared that introducing so many bees into a fragile ecosystem might disrupt existing species or fail miserably in the harsh conditions. But as the weeks passed and the bees started working their magic, the tone shifted dramatically. Reports of blooming wildflowers, healthier plants, and thriving bee colonies began to pour in. The data didn't lie. Nevada's desert was coming back to life, and it was largely thanks to those tiny pollinators. Scientists who were initially doubtful started paying close attention. They began studying the bee populations, plant growth, and wider ecological impacts. What they found was encouraging. The bees were not only surviving, but their presence was helping restore balance to a degraded ecosystem. This sparked a wave of excitement in the environmental community, with researchers calling the experiment a game changer for restoration efforts. Public opinion followed suit. Local communities, who had once been wary of the idea, started embracing the bees. Some even joined citizen science projects to monitor the bees and document changes in the desert. Schools used the experiment as a teaching moment about ecology and the importance of pollinators. The story of Nevada's desert revival captured hearts and headlines nationwide. Still, some voices remained cautious, reminding everyone that ecological restoration is complex and ongoing. They emphasized the need for continued monitoring to ensure the bees don't cause unforeseen problems, like outcompeting native species or spreading diseases. But overall, the narrative had flipped. What began as a joke was now a hopeful example of how nature and science can work together. Nevada's bee experiment showed that sometimes big ideas start with a little buzz, and that even wild, seemingly crazy plans can lead to real, lasting change. The bigger picture. Nevada's bold move to unleash millions of bees into a desert might sound like a one-off stunt, but it's actually packed with lessons that stretch far beyond state lines. At its core, this experiment challenges how we think about environmental restoration and the role humans can play in healing damaged ecosystems. One big takeaway is that sometimes nature just needs a little nudge. The desert wasn't dying because it was hopeless, it was struggling because a crucial part of the puzzle, pollinators, had disappeared. By reintroducing bees, Nevada's scientists gave the ecosystem the missing link it needed to bounce back. This shows that smart interventions based on understanding natural processes can make a huge difference. Another lesson is the power of resilience and adaptation. The bees didn't just survive in the desert. They thrived by adjusting their behavior to harsh conditions. This adaptability is a hopeful reminder that many species can respond to changing environments if we create the right conditions. The experiment also highlights the importance of working with local ecosystems, not against them. Instead of importing exotic species or forcing unnatural changes, Nevada chose native or well-adapted bee species, giving the desert a fighting chance without disrupting the existing balance. This careful approach is a blueprint for restoration projects worldwide. Importantly, Nevada's story challenges the idea that deserts are lifeless or beyond saving. Deserts hold unique biodiversity and ecological value. They're not just empty spaces. When given a chance, these landscapes can regenerate, providing habitat, supporting wildlife, and even contributing to agriculture and local economies. Beyond ecology, the experiment sparks hope about tackling global environmental challenges. Climate change, habitat loss, and species declines feel overwhelming, but Nevada's success reminds us that targeted, science-backed efforts can have real impacts. Small creatures like bees can catalyze big change. Finally, this story underscores the need for ongoing monitoring and community involvement. Restoration isn't a quick fix. It's a long-term commitment that requires patience and collaboration between scientists, locals, and policymakers. Nevada's bee experiment is a testament to the power of curiosity, courage, and the willingness to try something unconventional. It's a buzzing reminder that when we respect nature's wisdom and lend a helping hand, healing is possible even in the toughest places.